Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of our market update, our SoCal housing market update for first-time home buyers, where we kind of look at that specific end of the market segment. Before we begin, some really big news came out this week, and if you're the kind of person who's following housing, and in my experience, if you are a homeowner hopeful, you probably are digesting just about all the information you can get. You might have heard that probably one of your favorite websites, Zillow, has made a very big change in their business model this week. They are canceling their large scale program, which would buy up houses, remodel them, and then flip them. So kind of think of like flipping on a large scale. That was their plan to do that. And it turns out, in sort of a shocking financial revelation, if you buy at too high of a price and then you sell the house later for less money than you paid for it, you will be losing money. I say this a little bit in jest. In our Southern California home market, I think something that's important for buyers to understand is that for the most part, this news does not really affect you very much, at least not in the short run. And the reason for that is, nationally, right, Zillow owned about 7,000 houses across the entire country. Just in our given MLS system in the LA area, thousands of homes come on the market each and every week. So even in specific price categories. So in our LA and Orange County market. So really, to say that their position in the market was a tiny one, especially in our market, I don't think I can emphasize that enough. I mean, the reality is, I think a lot of people are telling stories that Zillow artificially inflated home prices. And, I would actually like to tell you they failed because they weren't able to artificially inflate home prices. I think that's what they were trying to do in some markets. Was they thought that if they bought the houses and they overpaid, their own purchase would become a comp and they'd be able to essentially control or make the market. And that actually did not end up happening for them. And they ended up selling a lot of the houses in their urban markets. 2/3 of their homes, they were selling at a loss versus what they paid. And that was even after putting money into some of those houses. The other thing that's important that I want to talk about a second is I love talking to people at parties about real estate, people who are not other people in the real estate industry. I think it's fun to hear kind of their perspective on things. And something that I think needs to be said is, if you're out there, and not that there's anything wrong with using Zillow.com, but there's something very important that you need to understand. And that is, when you go on there and you look at a house, I probably should have had one queued up here so we could do this. But if you go on there and you look at a house and you click the set an appointment or contact or whatever button, basically Zillow is selling that lead. So you are a lead and being sold to another real estate broker who will then try to convince you to use them to buy that house. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I think as a first-time home buyer, what you really want at the end of the day from your agent is you're going to have to trust whoever you're working with, right? And part of that trust is that it kind of requires that you believe that person cares about you and actually cares about the outcome of your home buying experience beyond just getting a commission check. And I think that's very hard to do when that relationship kind of begins with sort of that lead mentality. They've been sold a lead and they're trying to convert you quickly. I don't think that's the best way to build kind of that sort of relationship that's going to yield the kind of results that I think you deserve and give you the service level that I think you deserve. Anyhow, just to sum up, big news, lots of media headlines, probably doesn't actually affect you as a first-time home buyer in the Southern California market that much. So let's jump into the stats. We have kind of a little bit of an interesting change this week, so I'll go over that. So here we are looking at our closed prices. And again, this is 4 to 6 weeks out. And I think whenever we're in a period of a market that moves kind of suddenly, this is less important. What's more important looking at this is looking at the overall shape of these curves, right? You see big increases in the spring, kind of leveling out with more subtle increases going on. I still think that's mostly happening, though we're having a lot of supply side pressure right now in the sense that there is no supply. If you look here at condos, it's kind of more of a linear path, but kind of basically the same thing. We dropped down here a little bit, but I think this stuff is temporary. And remember, this is 4 to 6 weeks old. So this is telling us what the prices looked like a month to a month and a half ago. Not sure in our present market how useful that information is. Looking at our total payment, I mean, if you go by this, it still keeps our payments in line with everything. I remind this probably every couple of episodes, but I think it's important. When we calculate these total payments based on our entry level single family home and our entry level condo. So again, that's a 3-bed, 2-bath detached house versus a 2-bed, 2-bath attached property. We try to do this total monthly payment based on 5% down, including mortgage, insurance, taxes, etc. And we really want to give people an actual accurate idea of what those payments look like, because I think it's really important, to have real numbers that actually mean something to real buyers out there. And for most people, that isn't 20% down. For most buyers, that is less than 20% down. If you look at our income, again, our income threshold is right around 100 grand is our minimum household income for that single family home, and around 75 for our condo. Really, if you look throughout kind of our time period, you'll see that, yes, these numbers have grown a little bit, but they've really stayed pretty level in this kind of affordability range. Now we get to the fun stuff. I am astounded looking at where our condo market is. We have our second week in a row where this absorption figure is over 100%. What that means is that there is a condo shortage in the market. There just is not really enough condos to go around. Buyers are still buying condos. Sellers are not putting condos on the market. So, obviously this isn't anybody in this group, but if you were someone who owned a condo, now would be a great time to consider selling it, I think. I think you're going to find a market where you have very little competition. So especially, for those properties that might be a little harder to sell in another time period, now is a great time. But this is the first time buyer. This is the buyer market update. So we're not going to focus too much on that. I think if you're a buyer in this space, what does this tell me? It tells me you can't afford to be as picky with condos as you might have been in the past. If you're waiting for that one unit that's an end unit in the complex that has a view of the mountains, that's going to be a tricky proposition right now because our inventory levels are so low. It looks like we've gotten a little bit of relief on the entry-level single-family home market at 95%. But I'm telling you, 95% is not relief. It just means it's not nearly as horrible as it was last week. And you see there's a good amount of fluctuation in this. So this may run back up the next week. So I wouldn't take too much stock into this dropping. It's still inside of kind of that ultra limited inventory kind of zone where the market is just moving so fast. And, we're seeing just not that many properties are coming up for sale. Now, this was a little surprising for two reasons. First off, let's talk about condos, which is our red line on the graph. I didn't think inventory could just keep dipping down, but we're almost down to 1,000 units between LA and Orange County. If you go back and you look at where we were last fall, I mean, that really should tell you something, right? I mean, we almost had double the inventory last fall. If you look here at our entry-level single-family home, that's been marching downward. It did bounce a little bit, but we've had a couple little bounces before, right, in inventory, and they continue downward. Usually, we do see this taper towards the end of the year. I wouldn't get too excited based on this. I think some of this might be a little bit of interest rate positioning. It might be a little bit of buyer fatigue setting in. I think there were a lot of buyers waiting for the fall, and they thought, boy, the fall's going to get here. Things are going to be easy. I'm going to be rewarded for waiting all summer long to buy a house. And guess what? The rewards have not really been coming in for those buyers. And I think we're seeing some buyers get fatigued and actually leave the market. But, we might actually have to readjust our graph if this inventory drops below 1,000 units for our condo inventory. So I'm really excited to see what happens next week on our total single family homes. But just as a remember, folks, at sort of the worst of it, we were around 1,100, units of this entry-level single-family housing. I mean, we're still a little bit below 1,500. So, I mean, it's still roughly 30% better than it was at the worst of things. But, if you look at this here, I mean, we're going back to May, and you look at where we were, you know, towards the end of last year, November, we were at about 1,800 units of housing, and now we're below 1,500. So, we're almost a 20% drop in inventory of that entry level single family home versus where we were a year ago. I think it's important to bear that in mind. If that keeps dropping, it will put upward pressure on prices until we start to see an equilibrium. Now, this is kind of another measure of sort of market competitiveness we use. And I think it's interesting that both of these have jumped up a little bit. And what this is this tries to measure, are the homes going under contract the ones that just came on the market in the last 2 weeks? Are they older homes? And what's interesting about this is we're actually seeing that some of those newer homes are actually sitting just a little bit longer than they have been. Normally, I wouldn't say much of this, but both our condo and our entry-level single-family home markets ticked up. So kind of interesting to watch that. There is a good amount of fluctuation in this space, so bear that in mind as well, that we do have week-to-week fluctuations. And then finally, I want to take a second and talk about how many weeks of supply that we have. And I want to take a look back. Where were we in November of 2020? Well, in November of 2020, a year ago, we were almost just under 4 weeks of inventory for our entry-level single-family homes, and we were 9.5 weeks of inventory for our condos. Now look at where we are today in November of 2021, 4.3 weeks, so less than half the week supply of homes that we had last year for condos, and then we are below where we were last year for our entry-level homes at 3.6 weeks. So that edged up just a little bit. I have a little bit of a hypothesis. So this is just a guess. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think something that everyone seems to be talking about right now is that there are some very definite affordability limits in our market, right? If wages don't go up enough, that really is what allows home prices to go up, or rather home payments to go up. So what happens if there's scarce supply, but we're worried that there's just not going to be, people can't afford these new home prices? So you have two conflicting things. One thing says prices need to go up because we have limited supply. The other says, well, prices can't go up because nobody can afford to make the payments. I want to go back to this graph here, and I think I see actually what's happening. Those buyers that are starting to feel priced out by the payments that have been going up all summer long, those buyers are buying condos instead. And what it's doing is they are sucking up that condo inventory. And I think we're seeing those buyers are not leaving the marketplace, right? They're not just saying, I can't afford a house, so I'm out of here. I think those buyers are saying, well, we wanted a house, but you know what? Instead of struggling to buy a crummy house that needs a ton of work, let's shift our strategy. Let's look at townhouses. Let's look at condos instead. We can afford something much nicer, better schools, better area, maybe even more square footage than the houses that we're looking at. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that density shift. And it's happening not because people are excited to buy condos, but because that's what's available and what they can afford. And I think then you see the rationalization set in, right? We're starting to hear people talk about how nice it is to not have maintenance, to not have to pay for water, for landscaping fees, right? Generally speaking, out of my years of experience working with buyers, universally, this is how it works. Buyers will tend to buy on emotion, and then they will start coming up with the logical reasons to rationalize and justify their choice. Is that every single time? No. Is that all the decision? No. But that's a big component of human beings buying properties to live in. Investments might be a little bit different, but for human beings actually buying houses for them to live in, we see that really there's a big emotional push, and then there's kind of a rush to facts to justify the decision. So that's a little bit of my hypothesis. I think that's what's happening in our marketplace. We're seeing that shift a little bit. I hope you enjoyed this. If you are looking to buy a home and you'd like some expert advice and you're looking in the Southern California area, definitely hit us up. There's a link below for a no cost, no obligation 15-minute conversation. We'd love to do that with you if you're interested. Questions, comments, we love them. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And we will see you next week.